I'm Ros Atkins. Welcome to World Have Your Say on day 7 of the 2012 Olympics. Well, the track and field action in the stadium's begun, and over the next hour, we'll bring you all the latest results as they come through. And we're going to get your verdict on the first week of the 2012 Games. We're live here on BBC World News. You can get us on the WHYS hashtag. We're on facebook.com/World Have Your Say, or you can call us up now. Country code 4420 31 62 4240. Well, welcome to the programme. We're joined by 3 guests initially. The retired Olympian Roger Black, MBE, who won an Olympic silver and golds in all of the other major athletic events. Thanks for coming in to see us. We also have Peter Lewis from ABC News in Australia. Hi, Peter. Thank you very much. And last but not least, Emmanuel's here. He's Ghana's only judoka, and he was competing earlier on in the Games. Didn't go so well on Monday, though, Emmanuel.
No, he didn't. But I'm proud to be here, and I'm happy to compete in the Olympics Games because it's one lifetime achievement, and also to be the first ever Ghana judo player to qualify for the Olympics Games. It gave the sportsmen and women home hope and something to look forward for in future.
And you don't seem so down in the dumps as when I met you on Monday.
No, I didn't, because I have an opportunity, to reflect about the past, because sports is not always about winning, it's about the journey and the impact, and also the inspiration you give to other people in your country and all over the world. I believe that is what matters the most, not just coming here and then winning a gold medal.
Now, you're saying it's not just about winning, but Roger, the way some athletes have reacted to defeat in the last week suggests to them it was.
I think it depends on the athlete. I think it depends on the situation you're in. I think if you're an athlete who's just delighted to be at the Olympic Games and just to be part of the Games is success for you, that's fantastic. If you're an athlete whose goal is to make the Olympic final, that's fantastic. But if you're an athlete who is right up there, who has an opportunity to win and is focused on winning, and doesn't win because you've messed it up, then you have every right to be upset. You have every right to be angry with yourself, because that's right. You're there to do the best you can, and if on your day it meant you could have won a gold medal and you messed it up, then that's a fine thing. If however, on the day you're beaten by a better athlete or a better sports person, then I think the most important thing for any athlete is when you go back to the Olympic Village and you look in the mirror. And if that face comes back to you and says, you know what, you gave everything you could and there's nothing more you can do, then it's okay. If that face says to you, you know what, you bottled it, you didn't step up, then you have every right to be upset.
And when you looked yourself in the mirror after winning an Olympic silver, how did you feel?
I was fine, absolutely fine, because I was running against Michael Johnson, and at that moment in time, Michael Johnson was the dominant force in the 400-metre running. He was in a different league to me. I was delighted to win my silver medal because I could easily have come fourth. And I couldn't have run any better. So for me, it was my silver medal was my gold medal. So I think we must be careful. It all depends on the situation. I know there was your Australian swimmer who felt he should have won, and he was able to win.
James Magnuson.
Yeah, and by not winning, he has every right to be upset with that because he missed his chance.
But we have seen examples, and there was a British judo fighter who was the most watched video for quite a while on the BBC's website, saying he'd lost and he'd let his mother and father down, his friends down, his coaches down. It was quite heartbreaking to watch, and he didn't seem to have done anything other than performed admirably.
Well, he'd been beaten by a better competitor, actually. The Canadian pulled a move on him called an ippon, and it was all over almost as soon as it had began. And I think the wrenchingly sort of poignant part of us all is he was actually there by the side of the mat, having just been tipped out of a dream that he'd had for 25 years, trying to process all that. And he was being asked to process it in front of a national TV audience, and an enormous number of Scotsmen who were behind him and had been behind him for a long while. And it replayed in his head as he was talking, and it was almost like he couldn't process it. But the thing that I think was really, really tremendous for me, and I think it displayed a lot of the Olympic sentiments that we've just heard, is that when he was asked, did he make a mistake, he just shook his head and said, not at all. The Canadian actually pulled off a beautiful judo move, and he paid credit. He said it would be unworthy of me to say that it was my fault, And
Emmanuel, do you feel that you did yourself justice?
I didn't because I feel like I had a regret when I came off the mount because I didn't have the opportunity to perform as I should. I fought below my standard that day, and that is why when I came off the mat, I was really, really upset because I knew I could beat him. But during the fight, the opportunity didn't come, and I ended up losing. But then again, going back to UN scenario, judo is a very complex sport, and it's not the best player that win. You know, you have to be focused for 5 minutes, and if any least mistake happened within the fight, you out, and that's what happened to UN. It's not UN has been the top level player in 4 years, but
Absolutely.
you know that can easily go in a second.
And we saw it in the women's judo because the British judo player won a silver medal, and she was ranked 40th in the world coming in. She just happened to have the 3 best fights of her life.
Yeah, exactly.
And one thing I would say is that's what makes the Olympics special. Because every Olympian understands that it's what you do on the day in the moment. And they also understand that if you get it wrong, you have to wait 4 years. You don't come back the next week. You don't come back like in golf or tennis for another major a few months later. You wait 4 years. And 4 years is a long time in sport. And that's why the magnitude of the Olympic medal is as big as it should be. Because 4 years is a very, very long time.
I mean the point, you mentioned James Magnussen. I think James Magnussen had actually run that race so many times in his head in the lead up to London that he actually convinced himself that he was invincible. He called himself the missile and a weapon of mass destruction and all those kinds of things. I think he's actually been consuming large amounts of humble pie in the days since. We've got a saying in Australia, the tough part of being a good sport is you have to lose to prove it. And I think James Magnussen is in that zone at the moment, and he's not on his own within the Australian team. There is a few of them who are having to look very, very hard into a mirror and confront the reality that although they thought they were as prepared as they could be, probably mentally they weren't at the top of their tree. And of course, you can't discount the fact that your competitors want to win just as much as you do.
And you can't discount the fact that it's the Olympic Games and people come along in the Olympic Games that you don't cater for. But you also can't discount the fact that the great champions, the ones who keep coming back, the Michael Phelps, the Michael Johnsons, the Carl Lewises, the whatever, what these people do is they never get complacent. They never, even if Michael Johnson in 1996 was in a different league to the rest of us, and he was never complacent. He never treated us with disdain. He was very respectful to all of us. He was very respectful in victory as well, and that's one of the reasons he was as good as he was. He never got overconfident.
It's never a great idea to call yourself the missile. You need to let other people give you nicknames like that.
There are plenty of examples of scuds that turned into duds, and I think in Magnussen's case, he will reflect on that and he will come back a humbler, better athlete. You know, and if he's good enough, he'll be in Rio. If his head is good enough, and if he's prepared to put all that work in that Roger's spoken about, it is an enormous sacrifice out of your life. And he thought this was his moment, but maybe Rio is his moment. Maybe his moment has passed. We don't know. We'll know soon enough.
Well, wherever those of you watching the BBC are in the world, if you want to give us your perspective on the 2012 Games, you can call us up now on Skype, BBC_WHYS. We're using the WHYS hashtag, and you can call us now. We're live. Country code 44 20 31 62 4242. Now, I've got to ask all three of you about the controversy in the velodrome. I'm looking at a pile of emails here. Nick in the north of England says, I think Philip Hines taking a deliberate fall at last night's cycling is the last of its worries when it comes to tarnishing the sport's image. He's talking about, I think, the drug taking in the Tour de France in the past. James Murray, also in the north of England, I think Philip Hines was against the sport, but as everyone else says, we were worthy winners, even though the deliberate fall stained it. I mean, there's a huge amount of debate about this. Did any of you take exception to what he did?
I think when I first started sport, you know, they talk about fair play and things like that. But when you get to the world stage at the highest level, it's all about winning. You know, our coaches said you have to do anything to win. And then at that stage, there's no compromise anymore. You know, if you have to fall off your bike to win, you have to do it for your country because that is the order of the day. And for me, I do understand what he did to win the gold.
I think the reality of the Olympics, in fact of the World Championships and any major events these days, is that we have the athletes and the coaches and the officials take an oath, but I suspect when they take it, they've got a couple of fingers crossed behind their back because the gun goes off, the cauldron gets lit, and it's, you know, it's Rafferty's rules. It's not Marcus of Queensbury.
So is the mistake here that he said it out loud in an interview and the Chinese badminton players made it so obvious it stuck out?
Yeah.
I think the issue here, and I may be wrong on this because I haven't followed it too closely, but I was with a couple of cyclists last night, and I think they did play within the rules. I think the rule is it something like if you've come off before the first bend or something, then it's okay. Now, so within the rules, you would say it was common sense to do what he did. The question is the rule right? And it's the same with badminton. You know, the badminton players who you know, obviously try to lose their matches to get a better draw in the second round, were obviously that's not the right thing to do. That's just not. It's not. It leaves a bad taste in the mouth. The question is, what rule was in place that forced them to have to make that decision? So change the rules. I mean, the cyclists were playing within the rules.
And that's an interesting debate otherwise, because the two fastest teams and the team sprint in the cycling yesterday both disqualified for a rule that was correctly applied, but actually a lot of people say the rule is a nonsense. Let's pull up a comment here from the French cycling coach, Florian Rousseau, who says, the fact that he did it on purpose is not very good for the image of cycling. No. We must reflect on how we can adapt the rules so that doesn't happen and again in the future. So he's worried about how it looks, but actually the French riders, including Gregory Bourget, didn't make a fuss of it at all.
Well, I think they're in the tent. They're actually in the club. They actually understand how the rules and how the game is played. A lot of us who come to these events only for one, once every 4 years, and look, my knowledge of badminton could be scratched on the head of a pin. But I can tell you, right around the world now, a lot more people are taking a lot more interest in badminton, and whether this was a clever ruse to generate some publicity for the final round, I'm not sure.
Aman, would you do anything you could to win a medal?
I think I could. I think I will, because when you are in, you are there to win, you know, and then doing anything to win, I think everyone will, but the question is whether it's right or wrong. Then you just leave it to the people who make the rules to decide, not the individual. The individuals are there to take advantage of the situation. Now, to stop them, you need to change the rules.
So you say it's for the officials to worry about it and for the athletes to try and stay within the rules they're enforcing. Exactly. Well, wherever you're watching BBC World News, we're going to take a very, very short break. Then we'll keep on talking with our guests and with all of you about the first week of the Olympics.
Hi from the World Have Your Say newsroom. Here, a lot of comment has been coming in, both on Facebook and on Twitter. Tozer posts at Jessica Ennis, I think she'll be absolutely fine. A little bit nervous, but I'm sure she will feel the same way that we all felt when we were at school competing in our sports day. I certainly remember that. Luke in London posts, can you let me know when Jessica Ennis wins gold? And I'm going to take her on a date. So I think you're there with a little bit of luck. Jess, if you're listening. And then Cornelius in Beaumont, Kenya, posts on Facebook, Vivian Cheruyot will rule the 10,000 metres. I cannot wait to watch her, and I'm sure many of you will be glued to your seats watching that later on tonight. Shiraj in Nepal posts, I think Ennis will win, and I'm watching from here in Nepal, although I can't wait for Usain Bolt to race. And of course, that will be on Sunday. And Joey in Essex says the only way is Ennis, and that's Essex, just outside of London. A lot of you are still commenting, and you can, of course, continue.
We briefly said goodbye to Emmanuel, and we're saying hello to Renita Young, who's a US journalist who's writing for a number of websites, including LondonPrepares.com. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Well, we were just talking about whether the Olympic spirit is still here, if the athletes are behaving in a way that you think is according to the Olympic ideals. Do you even think that matters anymore?
You know what? I think it's sort of relative. You know, it's relative to the events that are going on, and it depends on what's going on with their particular country at the time. So I think they're behaving okay, but we'll see. We'll see what happens more.
And we were also talking about how athletes cope with defeat. I mean, I was struck watching the gymnastics. I mean, I found it incredibly intense watching the gymnastics because the fear in a lot of, particularly the women's eyes, was there. And the Russian athlete who got the silver was incredible, and the crowd adored her, and she was just in floods of tears at the end of it. Is that sport going too far?
You know, I don't know whether or not it's going far, but what I can say is that we just know that it's so much more emotion in the sport now, and it's so much more at stake probably, you know.
Well, they twist and contort their tiny little bodies at the very early stages of gymnastics to sort of become supple enough. I mean, they're basically cracked in two. And it's an intense regime for gymnasts. And by the time they actually get to competition, you wonder if there's any fun left in it. That's why Olga Korbut was so remarkable, that having gone through what must have been a very bruising regime in the former Soviet Union, she was able to come out and deliver with a smile on her face. And I think that's what, it was the first time people actually saw gymnasts having a bit of fun out on the mat, as opposed to sort of, sweating buckets of, blood.
And also, these are young athletes. These are not athletes who are in their sort of late 20s, early 30s. These are young girls and young boys, and there's a lot of pressure on their shoulders, and because of the nature of gymnastics as a sport, which by definition, to become the best in the world, you have to start at a very young age. You have to dedicate your life to it. It's really not like my sport of track and field, where you can come. I came to it at 18. I had a bit of a life before then. It's pretty intense. So you can imagine why the Olympic final and perception that you have underperformed and let people down. You can imagine on those young shoulders that sort of emotion.
And in particular when they're doing the beam, which, in my humble opinion, looks like the hardest Olympic discipline.
Do you know my question on the beam? I was watching the other day. I said, how do you learn that without hurting yourself? How do you do that on the beam? Well, at some point you must fall and hit your head.
They learn it at a low level before going up.
Yeah, but at some point you've got to do that flip, haven't you? You've got to do it at some point.
Look, the other thing about gymnastics and some of those other sports where they have subjective marks, I think it can be open to discussion about how genuine the marks are, because some people you see perform what you, for an outsider, would appear to be a flawless routine, and they're marked down so heavily, and so they've got not only the technical aspect of how they perform, but then they have to worry about whether or not it's actually pleased the judges. And
or good enough.
Good,
exactly.
Yes, yeah.
Whereas, of course, in other sports, track and field, swimming, non-negotiable. Cross the line first. You're the champion.
And then
doesn't matter.
And then we had a flood of, like for years nobody got a 10, and then there was a whole heap of 10s. I mean, all the scale seemed to switch over.
But what was interesting was Uchimura, who won the men's individual gymnastics gold, carries himself in such a charismatic, carefree way that you can just feel him winning people in who would not normally go for gymnastics, perhaps in the same way Usain Bolt did, and that he's sending out a message that actually what we're doing is fun rather than some form of torture, which sometimes when you look at the gymnasts, it looks like, they'd rather be somewhere else perhaps.
Well, sometimes it looks like that, but we know that could be concentration on their face, that could be anxiety, and you just never know. You just never know.
We're getting calls in from a great many different countries, including Uganda, Germany and Bulgaria. Thanks to you calling in from there. Also from Libya, Ghana, Tanzania and Zimbabwe. The Skype address is BBC_WHYS. You can also call us. Country code 4420 31 624242. You can comment on any part of the first week of the Olympics. And I just wonder, the three of you, more broadly, we've talked about a couple of the big issues, but generally, do you think these games are delivering on a practical level and also on a sporting level? Roger, have they left you satisfied?
Well, I'm biased, aren't I? I mean, I've been part of this for 7 years. We won the right to host this 7 years ago in Singapore, and I was part of the sort of ambassador to the bid. So I'm intrinsically linked with this. I've seen this.
But you'll also
I've
have
seen
high
this area. I've
expectations.
seen this area of London go from being a sort of barren wasteland to this magnificent Olympic park. So obviously, from a British perspective, and the sense in Britain is this has been a hugely successful games on every level. On every level.
Well, look, you couldn't have had greater expectations if Charles Dickens had wrote this story. You're in the midst of a bit of an economic downturn, probably as an understatement. So you need a circuit breaker like this. You need this party to work. So there's a lot of pressure on that front. You've actually had to pull together an enormously complex logistical exercise in the midst of one of the biggest cities in the world. And I'd have to say, despite a lot of hand-wringing about security and transport and logistics and so forth, my feeling is, moving around this city, talking to people, particularly your fabulous volunteers, that this is working. This is working very well. And I think in a couple of weeks' time, your politicians will start queuing up, perhaps even before the flame is snuffed out, to claim all the credit for it. But the real credit will go to people like Roger, like the team of people at Low Cog, and the sheer force of goodwill of all those volunteers.
You mentioned the volunteers.
Absolutely.
You know who should take the credit for the volunteers? You guys in Sydney in 2000, because the Sydney Olympic Games was the first games where the volunteer program transformed the games. And when you left Sydney, it was all about the volunteers, and we're trying to replicate that here. They set the scene as you travel around London, as you enter this park, and they're doing a great job.
There are people who were involved as volunteers in Sydney 12 years ago who have pitched up and come to London at their own expense to volunteer again. It's like they've been bitten by a bug and that they can't shake it. It's the Olympics, but it's also just being out there in those unmistakable jumpsuits and just bearing witness. Some of them will never see a game. They'll never see a sport. They won't have a ticket to anything, but they're part of it.
But, and this is an important but, for the people who are coming into direct contact with the 2012 games, there's an enormous amount of enthusiasm. But if you go into the West End of London, the centre of town, it's completely dead. All the retailers are saying no one's spending anything. Lots of Londoners have just got out of town. And so if you've got a ticket and you're involved, it's a thrill a minute. If you haven't, isn't there a risk that people are getting excluded?
It is a risk, but that's actually what LondonPrepares.com is all talking about. We're talking about places where you can go outside of the Olympics and still have the Olympic experience. So we have a guide to a lot of the country houses that are open to the public, and also just some of the fun free events around town. And we want people to still know that even if you don't have a ticket, you can be involved somehow.
All right, just before we go into the break, Roger, a quick word about the heptathlon, because Jessica Ennis had an incredible start. Not such a good high jump, but not disastrous. Good enough for you?
Absolutely good enough. And to put it into context, I always find it fascinating, the Olympic Games, where you're talking about the swimmer Magnussen, who isn't on the radar from a British perspective. Of course, in Britain, it's all about a few people, one of which is Jessica Ennis. Her face is all over this country, all over the billboard. She's the face of the Games. And she opened up this morning to set a world's best in the 100-metre hurdles, which tells me two things. One, that she's in great shape, but it also tells me that's a fast track. And that makes me very excited to see how fast the Usain Bolts and Johan Blakes are going to run on that track.
And you've already acknowledged that you're not the most objective person on these games, but you've raced in some of the great athletic stadiums in the world. How does this one compare?
No, clearly. I mean, it's clearly a great stadium. There's no doubt about it. But but now it's a fast one. And we're seeing people run really fast times, so I'm getting very excited, because I didn't think we'd see any world records in that stadium. Because we're in Britain, you don't set world records in Britain.
Because it's
the weather,
the
weather, you know, whatever. But I think the men's 800 metre, David Rudisha is capable of breaking the world record. Whether he goes for it in the Olympic Games is one thing. But I'm expecting fireworks from the likes of Usain Bolt and Johan Blake. I think we're going to see arguably the greatest 100-metre race that the Olympics may have ever seen, because of the quality and depth of that field. And it's a proper race this year. 4 years ago it wasn't. There was one man who had 10% on the rest of the world, and he doesn't have 10% anymore.
It's a shame, though, that the French guys dropped out to do the 200 metres, though, isn't it?
No, it's smart. It's smart.
Well, smart for him, but a shame for us.
You can't win the prize unless you buy a ticket.
No, yeah, he wouldn't. He knows his chance. If he wants an Olympic medal, he won't do it in the 100. He can win Olympic medal in the 200 metres. He's done the right thing.
And the point you made about Jessica being the face, I mean, she's under obviously enormous pressure, but often pressure makes diamonds, and she's off to a flying start. This is a terrific. Nice. This is a terrific thing, you know.
That's a nice turn.
I might use that. I might use that.
Yeah.
Pressure makes diamonds.
I'm putting it out there. You can. It'll be on my my Twitter handle later.
Well, however well people do inside that stadium, they're not going to get as many medals as Michael Phelps. He's now the most successful Olympian of all time. We're coming up to the news now, but I'm interested to ask all three of you and all of you watching whether you think Phelps is now the greatest Olympian, or whether he's just lucky, because in the pool you can get your hands on far more medals than just about anywhere else. You can Skype us BBC_WHYS. We're also on Facebook.com/World Have Your Say. Do get involved wherever you're watching the BBC in the world. Well, it's musical chairs here again in the World Have Your Say studio. Joe Ang from the BBC Chinese service is joining us. Hi, good to see you again.
Nice to see you.
Joe is here. He runs a swimming satire website. How are you doing, Joe?
Yeah, good, thanks.
Seen quite a lot of both of you on the BBC World Service over the last couple of days. Roger Black is still here, Olympic silver medalist, and gold in the other three, right, Roger?
Gold in the other three.
Fantastic. And 15 medals in total, which is no mean feat. Now, just before the news, we were talking, and those of you watching may well want to comment on this as well. Michael Phelps, now more Olympic medals than any other Olympian. the greatest ever, or just the man who happens to be the greatest swimmer ever?
I think it's a combination of his talent and also the luck, because he's into swimming. And who else can compete in 7 events in the Olympics? I think it's very hard for others to just apply to compete in so many categories. So I think it's a combination of his talent and also his luck in swimming.
Well, my view is that, well, coming from a swimming background, I'm bound to say Michael Phelps. But I think it really depends on how you define the greatest Olympian. Do you define it as simply the person that gets the highest number of medals, in which case, yes, it's Phelps? Do you define it as triumph over adversity, in which case we have Jesse Owens winning in 1936 in Germany with problems domestically and back home? Or do you look at someone like Daley Thompson, who in 80 and 84 won one of the most gruelling events, the decathlon? Or do you turn to someone like Michael Johnson or Usain Bolt, who really pull out the most incredible performance? I mean, these are all different ways of defining the greatest Olympian, but that doesn't mean that I don't think it's Phelps.
Oh, there's a group of people who could be in that category. Absolutely right. First of all, I think you have to defend your title. I think to do it at one Olympics is one thing, but to become...
Well, he's done in
yeah,
one
absolutely,
event
absolutely.
Twice
so
now,
the only swimmer
yeah,
to do it.
so I think to become the greatest Olympian, you have to at least defend your title once. So that eliminates a few.
But Jesse Owens was unfortunate in not being able to defend his title.
Sure, but we're talking about Olympic history, and we're talking about who is the greatest Olympian. And I think you have to have defended. Now, the question then is, how long do you defend for? Do you come back? Steve Redgrave, the British rower, over 22 years, 5 Olympics, 5 gold medals. You only had one chance at each. But it's rowing, and you're then going to compete. Can you compare rowing to athletics or to swimming in a participative sport around the world? Probably not. I think we may be having this discussion if Usain Bolt breaks the world record in the 100 and the 200 and defends both his titles. I'm not saying he will. If he does that in the next week, we might be throwing him right into the equation, not because he's got 4 gold medals, but because on each occasion he breaks a world record. That would be a serious discussion.
Yeah,
that would be a serious discussion. So there are lots of criteria here. The great thing is you can't just do it on the number of medals, because you're right. You have to add all these things into the equation, and there will never definitively be one. Because we'll all have this discussion.
When you were sitting there, you know, talking with the other 400-metre runners, did you ever amongst yourselves say, look, we've only got one shot at this. If we were the equivalent swimmer, we'd be in about 7 or 8 events?
Well, you know, Michael Johnson won 2 golds in Atlanta. He ran the 2 and the 4. Carl Lewis won 4 golds in 84 with the 100, the 200, the long jump, the relay. You know, he had a few shots at it. So I don't know. I mean, the best argument I had for Phelps was when I heard Ian Thorpe talk about it and say, well, hang on a minute, guys. You know, he was saying, I know that to be the best at all these strokes, obviously in Beijing, is not, you know, that's pretty exceptional. It's not simply a case of we all have a go and somebody wins all the time. So Phelps is right up there, and it takes a big argument to knock him off the #1 perch.
He won the hardest events in swimming. This is not the splash and dash. It's not the sprint. This is the 400 metres individual medley. The person who wins that is crowned the king of swimming, and so yeah, he got it for me.
And also the 16-year-old Chinese swimmer, and he got that 400 medley. I think that's amazing.
Well, the way the Chinese have performed in the pool is in itself absolutely incredible. Well, wherever you're watching, if you want to let us know who you think the greatest Olympian is, you're very welcome to let us know. I can see that we've got messages and comments coming in from South Africa, Sierra Leone, Mauritius and Saudi Arabia. And, of course, the Saudi Arabian woman in the judo was competing today, although sadly her campaign only lasted for 82 seconds. We've got a couple of messages here which, Joanne, you might want to respond to. Jesse tweets, one can't help noticing how poorly the African countries are performing, except for South Africa. It's a lot to do with the fact that many sports aren't done in these countries. But MTK in San Francisco says, you have to seriously address the way the Chinese are being demonised. Do you think that's true? Your badminton players have been kicked out. Your fantastic 16-year-old swimmer has been questioned by a US coach. Your sprint cycling team disqualified on a very small margin. Is that how you feel?
I think China joined the Olympics since 1988, Los Angeles, and I think the London Olympics is most extraordinary in terms of the first week. The Chinese team has experienced elation and also frustration and maybe humiliation. So elation in terms of the 17 goals in the first 5 days, that compares. It's the same number that China grabs at 4 years ago in Beijing. I think they turned London to be their own home turf. So they are the host in the first 5 days. And then the frustration because of that report with the 16-year-old swimming, Ye Shiwen. And also, I think, humiliation because of the badminton stuff, and then which really damaged their image.
They deserved to go, though, didn't they? That was a disgrace.
That's a disgrace for them. I think.
But it was within the rules.
It is within the rules.
You can't compare the two. I think they're
yeah,
very different
you
things.
can't compare the two.
The questions over the 16-year-old swimmer is a much more serious affront on the
exactly.
nation, I believe, because you've got to be very careful in sport. Everybody who does something extraordinary in sport, at the Olympic Games, of course, you're going to have a question. That's natural. But you've got to be very careful, because you have to believe that human beings can do extraordinary things. Now, the issue, I think, with the Chinese situation, and I don't know the details, is the fact that it seems to be a closed. We don't get to see what's going on behind the closed doors, and this is the issue. If the doors are open, then maybe what you're saying is.
Well, it's not as if we can swan into the US training camp.
Well, I don't know about that, but I think you have to be very, very careful, and I will always give an athlete the benefit of the doubt, because if you don't do that, then you will question any extraordinary performance by any athlete in any sport. And the moment you do that, you shouldn't be watching the Olympic Games.
I think it's a really difficult situation, because while I completely agree with you, and there is no evidence to suggest that she has taken drugs, the Chinese team themselves have been embroiled in drug scandals in the 1990s, in the 2000s. The 400 individual medley itself as an event was embroiled in a scandal in 1996 and 1976. And so if you look at it purely in that context, you can perhaps understand, if not justify, why the American coach made the comments he made. I still think, personally, and perhaps slightly controversially, that he made those comments on that particular day because it was the day she was racing again, maybe to unsettle her.
Didn't work, though, did it?
No, certainly not. She came on to win it again. I think the crucial point that people seem to be picking up on is the fact that she swam her last 50 faster than Ryan Lochte swam his last 50, going on to set the second fastest time for a man. Is that outstanding? Yes. Is it worrying? I don't think so. As you say, it's the Olympics. It's when people pull out exceptional events.
All right, let's pull up a message here from Felix in Hong Kong, who's emailed us. It's a sad state of affairs when, instead of celebrating the Games with sporting grace and enjoying what can be seen as an amazing sporting feat, leading sports figures and journalists from the largest media companies will instead lambast a 16-year-old child for doing such an achievement. Well, just to be clear, Felix, the furore really came about when a top US coach questioned it, more than it being questioned in the media. Let's speak to Khadija, who Skyped us from Saudi Arabia. Khadija, you're very welcome here on World Have Your Say. What comment would you like to make about the 2012 Games?
Yeah, just the wishes if the media decrease the pressure that's put on the sport in this time, because the media put a lot of pressure on them. So we need to make a sport back again to the main purpose of Olympic, spiritually, and not just for media or for money or for wins.
Well, Khadija, I think there's a lot of people watching who would have some sympathy with that, but Roger Black, I suppose the cat's out of the bag, really, and the media circus around the Olympics is only going to get bigger, isn't it?
Of course, because the Olympic Games gets bigger every 4 years. We now have professional sports, men and women. We have the American Dream Team here. We're going to have golf here. Tiger Woods will be playing in 4 years' time in Rio. We have the wealthiest sports men and women in the world playing in the tennis and whatever. It's world sport, it's a celebration sport, it's big business. Does it put more pressure on the athletes? Not so sure. Because I think as an individual, you know it's the Olympic Games. There's as much pressure now as there probably was 20 years ago.
And maybe you're not consuming a lot of the media as well.
Yeah, they're not watching the media. They're not.
You mean they're watching us now?
No, they're not watching us.
I can't believe it. I thought they were keen viewers.
Yeah, I think so, because I think the media, I think in terms of the London Olympics, I think this is the first time that 360-degree media we have microblog, to tweet, so everything we can tweet from Olympic Village. That has not happened 4 years ago when I was in Beijing Olympics, when Twitter something just came out. But now the London just make things extraordinary, and the competition is not only track and field, on swimming pool, it's also in the media. I think the story we just mentioned is also the media likes the stuff like the American coach saying allegation about the Chinese swimmer, and then the media quickly pick it up, and the snowboarding getting huge and huge.
But a lot of the sports and a lot of the competitors really revel in the fact that once every 4 years they get the opportunity for their sport to be in the spotlight and for they themselves to be in the spotlight. It's an excellent opportunity.
I mean, how many times am I going to spend an hour of my Thursday afternoon watching judo? It's only going to happen once every 4 years, with all due respect to the sports fans. Now, we've got to take a break here on BBC World News. When we come back, I know a lot of you want to talk about the medals table, partly just about where your country is on it, but also whether it might be creating such a huge amount of attention that it's distorting the way that the Olympics are covered in your country, wherever you are. So if you want to talk about that, now's the time to get involved. I'm Ros Atkins. We're talking about the first week of the 2012 Olympics here on World Have Your Say. Let's bring in Savannah from the team where all of your calls are being answered. Savannah, what have you got for us?
Hi, Ros. Lots and lots of calls from Nigeria, Sri Lanka, Sierra Leone, UAE, Germany, Ethiopia, and many, many more. Keep those calls coming in. We've got a personal comment that has come in from Kojo in Ghana, who says, I'm watching World Have Your Say in Ghana. Congratulations, my Ghanaian brother, for competing in the Games. So, so proud of you. And, of course, it was a pleasure to see you at the Ghana High Commission's residence last week, where he actually welcomed all the 9 Ghanaian athletes that are here in London. We've got Akeem in Nigeria, who posts, I am really enjoying the Games, and they've been organised so well by London. Thanks, Akeem. And also Abdi, who says, we have a lot of great Kenyans in London at the moment, all competing, and we are so, so proud of you. People around the world are watching you. The competition is so, so hard. And, of course, a lot more coming in. You can keep those coming through to us here. The phone lines are live. This is What Have You Say, and the hashtag is WHYS.
Thank you very much indeed, Savannah. The number of you in Kenya who are saying the Games are only really beginning today, I think the Kenyans are quite excited about what they might achieve. A nice message there for you, Emmanuel, from Kojo watching in Ghana. And you were on the BBC World Service with me a few days ago. Lots more Ghanaians were sending you messages of support. Does it help get over the disappointment to know that they're proud of you?
Yes, it did, because it made me realize how important the Olympics game is, and then the impact I had on them as home as well. And then that actually gave me the motivation to think about the next 4 years, because after my loss, I was just thinking, do I have got the desire and the ability? But now
You're ready to go
yeah,
again?
I think I'll go again.
Good stuff. Philip Vernon has sent us this message on Facebook. Concern about the medals table sounds like a first world problem. It's utterly insignificant. Well, let's talk about the medals table. A few years ago, Great Britain didn't seem to pay that much attention to it, Roger. Now it's a really big deal. That's changed, hasn't it?
There's a reason for that, though. It's the way the sport in this country is funded. And the better we do in medals, the more funding we get. So we can only judge the success of the London Games on the medal table from last. I mean, it's something to measure against. And everything for the last 4 years has been, can we better our performance of 4th? I don't even know the figures. 4th on the medal table, 19 gold medals, 47 medals in total.
Wow, listen
Why
to
do
that.
I know that? Because we all know that. So the talk in London is, with the home games, can we better what we did in Beijing? It's used as a measurement, and sports are judged against it. And the sports that do well will maintain their funding. And the ones that don't will probably be struggled.
6 golds, 5th at the moment, is where we are at the moment. For China, it's hugely important, isn't it? Coming top.
I think China is just the opposite position, maybe, because they've got to 20 at the moment we're speaking now. They're just 2 ahead of the USA. I think in China, the topic is that, do we really have to pay such a high price to get that so many gold on the top spot? Is there really... That means we're a really powerful sports powerhouse. Some just question about that because of all the national funding. It's not a real grassroots sport. So some people really question this mechanism now, the system now. And that also creates the problem of the badminton situation, because you are going for that ultimate goal of winning a gold, no matter at expense.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. 41 medals is how many China's got at the moment. Just before we wrap up today's World Have Your Say, I've got to ask you both, you're going through this, you've been through this, Roger. How does it work for an athlete after the Olympic Games when the attention's not on you, the adrenaline's gone, the training is finished? How did you go about
Well, remember,
dealing with
you know, athletes tend to work in a 4-year cycle, and everything builds towards the Olympic Games. And once it's over, you then have to readjust, reflect, but very quickly you start thinking about Rio. Because, you know, it's a young man's game. You've got to stay young, you've got to keep pushing. And athletes are very fortunate because to have that to be doing what you're built and very good at, your talent, and to have that single focus and knowing that Rio is in 4 years' time, it gives you something to go towards. That's a very fortunate position to be in life. So you know, I don't have that much sympathy for athletes. If you're lucky enough to be in the Olympics, enjoy it and go for the next one.
And Emmanuel, you can hang out in the Olympic Village, which by all accounts is a pretty good time.
Yes, because I have a time now to enjoy the whole atmosphere in the Olympic Village and everything that goes on there, you know. You live stress-free life now, so this is the best time to actually be in the village.
Can you get us in?
I could, if I can.
Sorted that. All right, Joe Hang, Emmanuel, Roger, thank you very much indeed. Thanks to our other guests as well, and to all of you who've got in touch. You can carry on the conversation at facebook.com/worldhaveyoursay. I'll be with you here on BBC World News in a few minutes with all of the latest Olympic headlines.